So, hi, and welcome to another episode of On the Couch. I'm Maddie Stratton, and I'm joined today by Danyelle Mei Kaplan and Egan Magee. Hello and welcome.
Oh,
Oh, before I get into introducing our guests, I would like to start today, of course, by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land in which we meet, live, and work. For me today, it's the Wadi Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation. We recognise their powerful connection to land, waterways, sea, and to community. We would like to pay our deepest respects to elders past, present, and emerging, to families, communities, and survivors, and to those who never made it home. As we share in our own knowledge and teaching in this space today, may we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. I think it's really important also to recognise and acknowledge that today we're all joining with diverse personal and professional experiences to draw and reflect on during these discussions. Please take good self-care during today's chat and do what you need to do to absorb the content. I will also refer you to a past episode of On the Couch with psychologist Chris Cheers and the concept of community care. And I know, Dan, you've done some work with Chris Cheers before as well, so I'm sure you would have seen that. So go back and have a listen at some stage when you get a chance and have a look at what that means. I'd like to encourage you all to think of today's On the Couch webinar as a visual podcast. We are all joining you from the couch. You can be joining us from anywhere. It is not a requirement to be sitting on the couch today. You will get any references shared in today's chat in a follow-up email. So yeah, sit back, get comfy, and I'll jump into introducing our guests. It's my absolute pleasure to host Danyelle and Egan on the couch, and I'm so looking forward to exploring some really interesting topics in the queer space. Important topics that we hopefully will be covering are things like trauma-informed practice, collective holding, mutual aid, community relationships, mental health, and well-being. So I'm kind of itching and ready to dive straight in, but first let's get settled in this space and start with a bit of a bio to get to know our guests. And so you will be hearing me talking for a little bit before we hand over. I'm just going to open up the bios that I would like to read out. Okay, so Danyelle is an accredited mental health social worker of colour with over a decade of experience working in clinical and community organisations on Lenapehoking, which is New York City, and Gadigal lands in Sydney. They specialise in providing anti-oppressive and healing-centred support with people of diverse cultures, diverse cultures as well, but diverse genders, sexualities, intersex variations, which we'll continue to refer to in today's chat as LGBTQ2IA+. They dream of helping people heal their relationships with themselves and others to create systemic change and liberate each other within colonial structures that are based on white Western models of justice and well-being. Egan is a massage therapist and currently studying occupational therapy. Egan is a body worker, a cat dad, an occupational therapist in training with a new hyper focus of crochet, which we love. He is passionate about ensuring resources get to the experts, the communities, and the individuals with lived experience, which, you know, is everything that we're all about here. Thanks so much, Winnie, for sharing screen. So there were just some highlights from your bios, but I recently came across psychotherapist Leah Manema from Co-Culture on Instagram, and really resonated with their work around indigeneity and collectivism. What I loved about their resource was this concept of fields of existence, right? That our beings are a field of activity made up of stories that we've been told, our ancestors that have existed, the land under our feet, and the places that we stand. And all of these forces form who we are in this moment as contextual beings. So I'd love to get started with both of your stories and how you define and locate yourselves and what your coordinates of belonging are. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Maddie. just want to say thanks for having us here, and I'm very glad to be joining you from beautiful Gadigal land. Sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Um, Coordinates of belonging. Shall I start? Coordinates of belonging. My coordinates are very vastly far apart. I have ancestry in Hong Kong Chinese uh, culture, Filipino culture, and also Jewish culture. I identify as an anti-Zionist Jew, and as we'll talk about more today, the personal is political. Who I am informs how I work, and yeah, I think that's enough for me for now.
Um, yeah, like Dan said, thanks for having us. Yeah, coordinates of belonging. I my lineage, as far as I know, comes from like Irish, English, Scottish, like mishmash of white people. And yeah, I don't really have much of a knowledge of my family lineage beyond my grandparents. So in terms of like that sort of belonging, I don't really know. Um, at this moment, I'm trans. I am sort of dancing between these this allied health space and sort of that's like embedded in health structures, and also my own practice, which is sort of like health adjacent and more like community rooted, and working with peers. I have a history of sex work. I don't do that anymore, but I still feel like I have quite a lot of sense of belonging in that community. Yeah, queer, yeah, lots of different places. And I guess for me, the idea of coordinates of belonging, it's like the belonging that I have right now has, it's a bit of a moving target. Like there's some things that aren't shiftable, like my my whiteness and uh my history, but as I move through life, those coordinates sort of shift as well. So that's kind of where I am at the moment.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept that I makes so much sense to me, but it was once there was some language around that, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to really workshop this for myself. And so I feel like that's kind of a nice little activity that we could all do to kind of work out what those fields of existence are and as a way of connecting with each other. Um, Dan, what I love about Magkasama, and did I pronounce that correctly? Thank you. Magkasama therapy is that you share that you are not a not a nice white lady with a soothing voice, and that's your words. Although I find your voice very soothing. But your words. You're a Filipino, Hong Kong, Chinese, Jewish, queer, non-binary person who lives wholeheartedly and believes wholeheartedly that individuals are the experts in their own lives. You have a commitment to center marginalized people of color in your work with LGBTQ2IA+ mental health, gender diversity, transition support, complex trauma, violence, and dynamics of power and control, systems of privilege and oppression, grief and survival. And this is such important work, and I know so valued. I'd like to just spend a little bit of time here, if you can, just to tell us how you got into this work.
For sure. I think being a neurodivergent, kind of multiply marginalized person, growing up, I was always oriented towards a particular sense of justice, and also just having really big feelings all the time, especially with like living in the diaspora and having migration experience, and also being the descendant of survivors of trauma and genocide. I think that really shapes how I got into this work, because concepts of justice and the lack of it has always been around in my life. And as I continued, my path of interest just sort of naturally led me to intersections of who I am, which is around like LGBTQ2IA plus mental health, with a special interest in queer and trans people of color and their mental health. I really wanted to name, instead of kind of telling my life story, which is like one of enormous privilege to have the access to education and resources that I have to be here. I thought that it was maybe more interesting to name some people in my solidarity team who've kind of been really pivotal in helping me be where I am today. So my like staunch, badass grandmothers and ancestors. I had a model of queer and POC queerness and mentorship in a really pivotal elder named Del Villar when I was growing up. On Lenapehoking, I had the enormous privilege of working with and loving Miss Victoria Cruz at the Anti-Violence Project, shout out, who absolutely showed me the preciousness of elders and living ancestors and dissolved the ideas of expertise and clinical distance as anything except another form of white supremacy. And then on Gadigal lands, learning from Rebecca Howe and Jager McEwen, who really modeled radical love and showed me that the problem is the problem. People are not the problem, especially not marginalized and oppressed people. My supervisor, Sekna Hamoud Beckett, who also showed me radical love and taught me about worthiness and how we are our own best resources, and that who clients tell me I am is much more important than what my boss thinks of me. And you, Egan, my collaborator, co-conspirator, you. Collaborator, co-conspirators, you know, like these are the people who keep me grounded in my values, who remind me who I am, and who shoulder me up and contextualize my experiences of spiritual pain and rage and despair, and informs how I can fully show up as myself in this work while also surviving the colony. That's my very long answer. Thanks.
It's a beautiful answer, and I feel like what I'd love to do, and we are recording this, is go back and listen to that again, because there is so many people in there that you've been able to highlight as part of that journey to where you've got into the work, and I love that it is like this community and this real sense of support for each other. And Egan, Dan did specifically ask if you could join us for this conversation. So I really look forward to hearing from you, because Dan speaks very, very highly.
Pressure.
So I'll just read a little bit what I've learned from you online. Here we go. You work from a person-centered, body-neutral, trauma-informed, queer and transliterate perspective. Make treatments a collaboration between the client and the practitioner. You have shared with me before that you aim to create a practice that prioritizes care and access for historically marginalized and excluded people, not only for physical comfort, but for joy and nourishment. We love a good inception story. So can you please tell us how you came into your work space, and also a little bit of a story of how you and Dan connected?
People ask me this a lot, and I feel like the answer is not actually that exciting. I don't really know how I just kind of fell into it in a way. like my life has sort of been on a like atypical timeline to what you know, like leaving school, going to uni, doing the thing, blah blah blah. I did an undergrad in my like when I was like 23, which is technically like mature age. So like I went in and I did my undergrad in medical science and then ended up with this degree and then was like, cool, I don't know what to do with this now and I don't know what to do with my life. I started sex work when I was about 19. So I was doing that alongside my degree and then I got to the end of it and then was really, really burnt out and kind of just had this piece of paper and I didn't really know. I knew that I really loved bodies and I knew that I loved physiology and I knew that that was a really exciting space for me. But I also knew I wasn't built to live in a lab or do like very sterile work. So I just continued doing sex work for, you know, right up until COVID, actually. COVID was the reason that I stopped. And it was just such a wonderful space for me. Like I really love that relational aspect of working with people, and working with bodies is a very comfortable and like nourishing place for me. There's a lot of reciprocal nourishment that comes from that intimate space, especially like whether it's sex work or like body work that's not sexual. It really is just this place where you go into an agreement of trust with somebody and you have to hold that very carefully, and you like, whether someone's being active or they're just lying on a table, like you are both in a really active conversation with each other, and that's the thing that I've always really, really loved. So yeah, I kind of got to my late 20s and was getting quite burnt out by sex work, mainly just because of the financial insecurity. Like that style of work is just so hard to predict, and it's also it's something that I didn't realize until later, but having a job where you can actually tell people what you do, it really changes your social dynamics, and that was a really massive strain for me. That every time I met someone new, I had to weigh up, like, would I lie or would I not? So all of that stuff kind of led to burnout. And yeah, I thought I knew that I wanted to work with bodies. And I think logistically, I'm a very impulsive person. I like just looked up the thing and I was like, cool, I can do this diploma in 1.5 years. I can be working, like that's compatible with my life at the moment. And sort of did it on a whim, and then was like, actually love this. And it was a stepping stone to marrying the work that I feel like I'm good at and I love with my community and with people that I care about and feel that sense of belonging with. And yeah, and then I started, and then it just kind of spiraled from there, and that was 7 years ago. And
It spiraled.
and that's not a good way to put it. And just it grew like a beautiful tree. But yeah, that was 7 years ago. And then yeah, I don't know, I reflect on my work a little bit. Like so I'm one of the many people who came out as trans during COVID. And like I laugh so much when I think about like the first like 4 or 5 years of my practice being like, this is a place for trans people to feel comfortable. I'm cis, I'm not trans, but all the trans people can feel comfortable about coming to me, but not me. Yeah. And then COVID happened and I stopped doing sex work, and then I stayed inside my house for 3 months, and then I was like, oh no, I think actually it's me.
Yeah.
My work has been really like, that's kind of what I mean by like reciprocal stuff, like every little interaction with the people that I work with has added some level of like reflection on myself or growth in myself, or you know, there are very few spaces where I feel completely seen, and I'm really lucky to have a workplace where I do feel that 99% of the time. Yeah. So, and that's just because I have the best clients in the world.
And like that's also informs kind of how we connected. Not that I even remember exactly
I don't remember either.
how we met, but I think finding shared values in each other and like feeling safe to grow and be creative and like also just like despair with each other, like yeah, that's
When you
Yeah.
find your people, right? Like
yeah.
it all just makes sense when you find your people.
I think actually our relationship really deepened like through lockdown stuff because I think for both of us, the people that we were working with, the repercussions of lockdown and like just the whole intensity of that couple of years, our people were managing so much, and I think our relationship really started by looking to each other for professional like peer support through that, and then that just sort of grew into more of a friendship.
Yeah, I love that. I am going to move us into some of the discussion because I am looking at the time and we've already been 20 minutes talking. So for our live audience, we might be going a few moments over, but settle in, we'll be fine. If you have to leave, of course, you'll get the recording, so you won't miss anything. I've been reading into the integrated framework, which includes a response-based practice, narrative therapy, somatic, trauma-informed, and healing-centered approaches. I read somewhere, I think it was probably your website, that you said that respectful therapeutic relationship is more like walking alongside each other rather than a top-down power dynamic, which I obviously love that idea of co-creating spaces that are client-centered. It sounds super collaborative and safe to explore and be curious in the practice. And I can kind of feel that already in the introduction and the conversations that we've already had. Dan, can you share why you walk alongside a client and how they are experts in their own lives?
Sure. So I think the important thing to acknowledge first off is that we are all working within an inherently white supremacist and colonial health system and many other arms of white supremacy in education and I mean welfare, everything. It's inescapable. And so power dynamics exist and therapists hold incredible power as an extension of that colonial system in the room and in the world. And this power dynamic can very, very easily reinforce trauma and violence, especially with multiply marginalized people. That's what I hear a lot as well when people come to me. I believe that it's my ethical obligation, it's a therapist's ethical obligation to share power as much as possible in what Vicki Reynolds calls bridging the power vortex, which just says like, we are not equals entering this room under the gaze of white supremacy. And if I don't name it, then it won't be named. And people are very rarely treated as experts on their own lives in the arms of colonial systems. For example, dealing with social services, advocating for themselves in medical systems with Centrelink. And it's pretty incredible what can happen when people are just met where they're at and they're believed and recognized for doing their best while also surviving the colony. I believe it's my obligation to make it public because of these power dynamics, to make it public about who I am and what my values are so that people can make an informed decision about whether I am the right person for them. And I always preface my input by reinforcing that people can tell me if I'm wrong, because it's very possible that I am wrong. They are the experts on their lives and how things feel and what things mean. I just guide or lead with curiosity and let people go where they want to go without any kind of pathologizing or expectation from me.
Yeah. So can you talk us through a little bit more around how you center anti-oppressive, intersectional, and decolonizing ethics in this therapeutic approach, and maybe a little bit more around your passion for centering, I guess, racial and social justice principles in your practice?
Sure. So I think one of the best or the simplest ways that I center anti-oppressive ethics and decolonizing ethics in my work is by allowing myself to be myself, and to be an active companion, collaborator, co-conspirator, and gate opener wherever possible as clients go where they want to or need to process that day without judgment, expectation, or pathologization. I'm really not interested in this kind of white savior oriented idea that I help people heal, because that reinforces that weird power thing that I don't want, that we were just kind of talking about. I'm much, much more interested in helping people understand themselves better, understand their relationships better, and understand that they are not the problem. The problem is the problem, which is white supremacy and systemic oppression and trauma incurred by these conditions on a daily basis, not just on a one-off. And that then facilitates healing or a transformation in the ways that they want. I really wanted to share a really cool way of phrasing what I want to do or what I dream to do within the framework of decolonizing ethics in this work. Inclusive therapists on Instagram had really perfect phrasing, so I'm going to borrow from them with gratitude. I really, really am interested in using my power and resources to actively betray my role in upholding colonial violence, to pay reparations and support land back and justice doing movements, including that of Palestine, to hold one another accountable, starting with the most powerful, to dismantle whiteness, white feminism, and white supremacy delusion, and to divest from colonial capitalism as much as possible. That is what I'm down for.
Yeah. And I've really felt that, and I will cut this out of the recording, but I am in a bit of an emotional edge at the moment these days personally. So I really kind of felt that just kind of go all the way through my body as you read that out and as you explained that. So I really appreciate you, speaking to that and also sharing someone else's, words around that, and adding to it, because I think it's really important to be able to I guess put the words around how we feel around those topics. So thank you so much, Dan. To our listeners,
inclusive therapists is the credit.
Inclusive therapists. We'll make sure we add that in the show notes as well, because it'd be great to be able to point some people down that direction too. So how can we provide for our listeners? How can our listeners provide non-pathologizing, respectful, and empowering care and support through their own work, whatever that might be? We've got quite a large listenership, very diverse. Yeah.
My notes for this question are so helpful. Try not to be shit if you can possibly help it to the best of your ability. That's kind of what it boils down. Beautiful. I thought maybe I would reflect on the modalities that I specifically enjoy in the kind of therapy that I do, which informs how at least I think I can best provide the most empowering care and support. I work through a lens of harm reduction, which means I don't expect perfection. Perfection is a myth of white supremacy, and expecting abstinence or any kind of black and white totalizing behavior or outcomes is actually not sustainable, not reasonable, and not very human. And so harm reduction just says you do your best as much as you can, and you hold some compassion for yourself when you are not perfect. And this extends to, you know, like substance use, mental health, self-harm, suicidality, things that people are often really made to feel shamed and judged for not getting right or not fixing in a concrete and time contained way. So there's harm reduction and abolition. And a very, very basic description of abolition. I'm not going to go into it too much. I'm going to give lots of resources for people who have written and like are the experts on abolition, but basically abolition is seeking restorative justice instead of historic punitive measures in colonial systems, and ending the conditions which lead people to being policed, leading to them being imprisoned, and modern slavery and loss of life and oppression. There are just so many people who talk about abolition incredibly, and I'll give lots and lots of references for that, but those are two really core principles. And I really like narrative therapy. Sekma Hamud Beckett, again, all credit to her for really showing me that narrative like meshes with my ethics and how I approach things. And more, I'm really enjoying internal family systems or parts work because it's very flexible. These are just modalities that are very, very, very flexible and most of all restore justice, dignity, and autonomy to clients. So that is my long-winded answer to how I think I try my best to provide that kind of care.
Yeah. And I guess, you know, some really big topic areas, you've kind of introduced abolition already, but, and I guess the narrative perspective of justice doing, naming, and dismantling oppressive systems of power and liberation through solidarity, decolonization, and as you said, abolition. We have kind of already started talking about this, but was there anything in this that you wanted to add maybe around that justice doing stuff before we move into a different topic area, because I don't want to brush over it. Yeah.
Of course, for sure. Thank you. So I'll just kind of touch on like instead of telling you what I think these things are, I think I'll try to illustrate it with how we try to do things within the best of our ability at Makasama. So the one way that we incorporate justice doing and sustainability into our organizational choices is intentionally by prioritizing sustainability for all as best as we can. We know that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism and that perfectionism is a myth of white supremacy. We are just doing our best. One of the ways that we do our best is is by having something like a sliding scale. That structure maximizes our capacity to provide accountable, accessible, and fee-free services wherever possible, and also kind of as like collateral benefit invites people to participate in mutual aid and community care in that way. By sharing power through advocacy and the metaphorical gates that my name on a letter can open because I could afford to go to school and get the right letters after my name, which means that people believe me more and take me more seriously than my amazing clients. Also by intentionally seeking out collaborators like Egan, who I can co-conspire with and howl at the moon at and build community with our shared ethics. I knew that I could trust him with our people. It's intangible but essential lived experience that makes makes it work. And I try to use the most expansive, client-led, flexible, Indigenous informed therapeutic frameworks wherever possible to complement the directions that people want to go.
Yeah, cool.
Nutshell.
Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing all of that. I would like to move on to now some key topic areas. Obviously starting with having to start with trauma-informed practice. It's a term that hopefully we have all heard many times in our work. We've used in our practice and also have been to many training around trauma-informed practice. I'll do a brief introduction just as a reminder, a refresher, I suppose. Trauma-informed practice seeks to create environments that promote healing, recovery, and empowerment for individuals who have experienced trauma, whilst also recognizing the broader societal and systemic factors that contribute to trauma. It emphasizes empathy, compassion, and a commitment to providing and promoting the well-being of those who have been affected by trauma. So, so that this doesn't become a trauma-informed workshop, I'll start us off seeing some of what the key principles of trauma-informed practice are before we dive in a little bit deeper. So we have safety, trustworthiness and transparency, empowerment and choice, collaboration and mutuality, cultural, historical, and gender sensitivity, resilience and strengths-based approach, and lastly, trauma awareness and understanding. I'll hand over to you now to share with us, I guess, how you work within this approach and really what we could be doing to not fall into this potential performative trap where we're just, ticking a trauma-informed box.
I appreciate your framing of this question, Maddie. You've been reading our notes. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, I think like trauma-informed is like a catch-all. Like I think that there's a like trauma-informed approaches. It kind of goes in two prongs where there's like trauma-informed structures, whereas like how you structure your organization, versus like trauma-informed practice,
Yes.
like person to client,
Yes,
or like person to whatever term you use for the people that you work
yes,
with. And I feel like they're different because one is talking about a systemic organizational level kind of considerations, whereas the other one is looking at my approach to the person in front of me.
yes.
And yeah, I mean, I guess I can, yeah. We were talking about this before, and like I find it interesting because when I started like trauma-informed approaches in terms of my dealings with my client were very central to my practice. But I feel I'm in an interesting place where I feel like over the last year or two, I've become a lot more critical of that. And I'm not really sure if trauma-informed really like sits with me in the same way that it did before.
Yeah.
I feel myself much more pulled towards more healing-centered engagement kind of practices. And one of the main critiques of trauma-informed approaches is if we're talking about like being informed by trauma, then it sort of positions someone as having like being defined as this event that has happened to them.
Yes.
And it positions trauma as like a thing that happened.
Yes.
And that's what we need to be aware of with this person, rather than healing-centered engagements that pull the focus way more into social and systemic factors that we are immersed in every day, and the intersections that people live at will mean that they have daily experiences. Sometimes that can be something that is an event that you can name, and like most of the time it will be the daily occurrences that can that erode someone's sense of well-being in the world. So pulling it into healing-centered engagement, it also puts it more in a sort of like future focus and expands it out. So again, coming back to that stuff that Dan was talking about of like the problem is the problem, the person isn't the problem. So if we can broaden out the perspective to see that, then that individual immediately becomes less pathologized and immediately becomes about what's the best way for you to be able to survive in the world, to give you the maximum amount of well-being, rather than like what kind of therapy are we going to do about your trauma? Like they're very, very different approaches. Also, just when you were talking about like walking alongside people, it just made me think of that concept of like inevitable recovery and how like every single day, every single thing that you do gives you more information, it gives you a new experience, it gives you more opportunity for growth. And if people are supported in the right way, taking into consideration the context that they're in, then like every single thing that they do will give them more information to then be able to grow and reflect and see their own ability to make it through the world. And with the right support, like it's just inevitable that somebody will get to where they want to be. Like we're just really there to kind of do the holding as we go, but the person like being able to engage with the world in the ways that they want and need to, and not just for being somebody used the term yesterday, like an eternal like self-improvement project. You know, letting go of that and being like, actually, what makes you happy? Like, you know, and moving with that. I mean, like, it's inevitable that people will.
What you just said reminded me of something that a couple of the people that I mentioned earlier in my solidarity team, Rebecca Howe and Jager McEwen, really taught me that the goal is not for us to work forever or to facilitate that forever. The goal is to share skills, share knowledge, so that one day, hopefully, we're not needed. Like my dream is to work myself out of a job. I think that, does that kind of mesh with what you were talking about?
I mean, I think yes. Also, like for some people, they will just for a lot of people, we will always need
absolutely.
But also that doesn't necessarily mean therapeutic support. It means like, it's again coming back to that idea of like the landscape that we live in, like our like skill sets of therapists like are siloed, right? Like there is gatekeeping around knowledge of how to support people. And this is different depending on what community you what communities you belong to, what your experience is with community care, like cultural considerations. My context here, I feel like you have therapy people do this, social workers do this, you know, but like generally my experience of social community, we're quite deprived of the skills to be able to support each other in that community way. And like the things that were kind of taught straight away is like, if you need help, we'll send you here. And so like I think it kind of marries with that of like I would love to be put out of a job, but I think for that to happen, it's again at that systemic level.
For sure.
Also like the thing of like coordinations of belonging and that sort of thing. Like I think that it's also important to bring in that like belonging can really suck sometimes. Like I belong to some groups that I wish that I didn't. Like you know, having a chronic illness, like I am nourished so much by peer experience and connections with community of people who have chronic illness. I kind of really wish I wasn't though, like, you know, and I think holding that in mind, that belonging is very meaningful and a key part of wellness, but also like it's saddled with a lot of grief.
Yeah.
And it's hard to think about. I guess I'm tying that into like trauma-informed approaches of like, yes, we want to be strength space. Yes, we want to be looking forward and like future focused and bolstering people's sense of self-efficacy. But I think holding that in mind as well of like, actually some stuff just sucks and it will still. And there are days when it sucks less, but it just does. And that doesn't inherently mean pathology. That just means like some things just aren't very nice.
And it makes me think too, back to, you know, those fields of existence that Leah Manima talks about. And she gives this great definition of self-sovereignty being this ability to have autonomy and dignity over our own field. And I feel like that really kind of connects with what you're saying, you know, that the more that we nurture, relate, and are curious about speaking to our relationships with our coordinates of belonging, the more autonomy and dignity we have over our fields of existence, the more ungovernable we become, and the more we're able to find each other and I guess bond through our resistance and our commitment to healing. And I guess then the more agency we have over the work and the way that we move through move ourselves throughout the land and how we shape our world. And I think that really kind of connects, and they, you know, all of Leah's terms, they're not mine, but that really kind of connects with what you were saying then around belonging. And the other thing that I was thinking about was this sense of holding, and I want to talk about collective holding, you know, as a key kind of part of this discussion that we've already kind of started talking about. It's a term that our listeners may or may not be familiar with. When you Google the term collective holding, a whole heap of stuff comes up, a lot about companies, and also something really random about Bitcoin. I'm not sure where that came from, but when we talk about collective holding in the queer space, it refers to the practice of creating and maintaining supportive, inclusive, and safe environments within our queer communities. It involves individuals collectively supporting and uplifting each other, especially in the face of discrimination, prejudice, or marginalization based on sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. So to go a little bit deeper, this concept encompasses various forms of support, including emotional support, validation of experience, providing resources and information, advocating for rights and equality, creating spaces where individuals feel accepted and respected for who they are. Collective holding recognizes that systemic oppression and societal stigma can negatively impact the well-being and mental health of queer individuals, and it encompasses the importance of community solidarity and mutual care, which you both have already kind of touched on already, as a means of resistance and empowerment. So that's a little introduction of collective holding. But in practical terms, collective holding can manifest through community organisations, support groups, online forums, social events, other platforms where queer individuals come together and share experiences, help and build connections. It's about fostering a sense of belonging and solidarity within the queer community to promote individuals and collectives' well-being. So I've done a lot of talking there, but I felt like I had to kind of introduce the concept before we hand over to you to go that next layer deeper and tell us why this is so vital and how you both create this in the work and in your own lives.
Thanks, Maddie. I thought it might be helpful to reflect on the particular dilemmas and also the healing potential of working within the same communities that we live and that we live within. Why it's so hard, but also why it's so worth it. In the spirit of decolonization and deconstructing white supremacist ideals of clinical distance, and honoring ancestral ways of showing up for each other. I'm not going to go on the side quest that I wrote in the notes. That is not relevant. Instead, I'll talk a little bit about how like clinical distance is something that shows up a lot, at least for me, especially when my imposter shows up and says you're not good enough or you're not working the right way, because the what we are taught is good practice is often what re-traumatizes people who we work with, because it's based on white cultural norms and white institutional norms of justice and well-being. My supervisor, Sekna Hamoud Beckett, taught me about radical love. I remember when I was earlier in my career, and I raised like, I keep feeling like because I am in the same community that I am too close, or that my boundaries must be bad because I feel or I relate so deeply to the people that I'm working with. Sekna taught me about this idea of radical love, which is that we can have a radical kind of love for the people who we work with, who we are taught as clinicians we are more knowledgeable than, or have to be distant in a particularly clinical way with, as a way of reinforcing good practice. She really dissolved that for me to say, like, that is white supremacy at work. We can have radical love for ourselves, for the people we work with, as has been done in ancestral ways since time immemorial. It's the how we come up, how we are accredited, qualified, credentialed, really shapes how okay you feel with bringing those parts of yourself into the work. Because according to white Western medical models, if you are not clinically distant, then you have bad boundaries.
Yeah. But we're not robots.
Yes.
Right? And I don't want to be a robot either. And so please don't turn me into a robot, because I feel and I have empathy and I have compassion and kindness and I feel connected to that person. And how could you not?
Yeah.
I think it's a really it's a good reminder of that, and not kind of having that screen across ourselves and our hearts, right?
Yeah, if I can expand on that just a little bit more. Vicki Reynolds collaborated on an amazing article that I'm going to put in the resources called Not on Our Backs, which really breaks down the dilemmas of belonging and isolation that many queer, trans, and First Nations and practitioners of colors feel when working and living within the communities that they're also part of. Because realistically, we were never dreamed of by institutions to be in this role. Speaking for social work specifically, it was always conceptualized of as a profession where predominantly privileged or upper class or upper middle class white women would have the skills and knowledge to go into other communities, particularly marginalized communities, to disperse, to hand out judgment and guidance and whatever, and then to go back to their nice intact bubbles that are totally separate. People like us were never dreamed of to be here, to have these dilemmas. So when we do have them, or when institutions reflect that back on us and say, your boundaries are shitty because you're empathizing too much, or you're feeling implicated in what you're working within. reinforces itself over and over like this. So we were never imagined of being here. There's no real template.
Yeah. Yeah, which is the same in occupational therapy.
Yeah.
Like OT's roots are US based, like,
Yeah.
you know,
White savior,
white, yeah,
like model.
for sure. And like continues to be that way. Like OTs is a profession dominated by white,
Yes.
essentially, like mostly middle class women, which have, like, you know, and in the last few years has been gaining like more and more critique on that. But yeah, exactly, like we were never expected to be here. But I think that's the same as like anything within Western models of health provision. Like, you know, it's made on a really specific template for a really specific group of people in a really specific way.
Yes.
So it means that inherently it's not just that we're not represented, that we don't have the choice. We don't have easy choices in terms of finding people with lived experience or like experiences similar to us, but we also, like, we just aren't included in service design. Like, we're just not there. Like, before you even get to things like, is it client directed or informed or healing centered or whatever, it's just like we're just not even there. Like, it's like missing completely. So yeah. And I think that's when talking about boundaries and like, yeah, working within the same communities that you're part of, I think that brings up a really essential question of like, how fair is the distribution of labor on that, and the lines between like prioritizing the voices of people with lived experience to be able to show up for their peers, but that doesn't mean that we are the only ones that should be holding the labor of this. And when you are working with people, like when you're holding people in whatever modality it is, that have a similar experience to you, you're both showing up for them, trying to keep your own self-sustainable, but you're also bearing witness to multiple, you know, like we see, like Dan sees like 6 people in a day, you know, I see like 5 on a busy day. So it's like you have multiple times a day where you're bearing witness to someone, to a peer going through, you know, maybe going through hard stuff in their life, but navigating an incredibly unjust system. And seeing that their situation is 10 times harder because the system is treating them like shit than what it could be. And so like that is a really deep, and like Vicky Reynolds talks about it as like spiritual pain. Like that's what leads to burnout. Like that's what our burnout is. It's about it's that extra dimension of labor as a person working with people that you know what it feels like in a vague way. Like nobody's experience is ever the same, but like we see our people and we care for them and we have that radical love for them and we know that they have everything that they need. And if they could just be supported in the way that they deserve, things would be really different. But you keep hitting up against those barriers to try and do that. And so like the idea of labor dispersal in terms of care, I think is a really, really important one. And also, you know, for people like both of us, we work for ourselves. Like, you know, because there aren't necessarily homes for us in traditional structures. So then you add on the extra labor of like surviving, trying to do that work in capitalism and, you know, everything else. So it's hard.
I think what you're talking about is so important, because I really want to emphasize our clients don't burn us out. Unjust systems burn us out. That is what makes things unsustainable. That is what perpetuates daily microaggressions and re-traumatization. It's not that our clients burn us out. It is unjust systems that every step forward we take, it's like want to drag us to 10 steps.
And I think like trying to put that in like real terms, you know, for people who, you know, like we can name problems to the end of time because there are so many. But you know, I think like for people working in those spaces who don't have that kind of lived experience, like if you're kind of like hearing it and you're like, that's such good information, I don't know how to apply it. Like I think a really important thing is like going back to first, before you're thinking about doing any action, go back to a reflexive practice. Like figure out, actually, you need to locate yourself where you are to know where to move from. So like coming back, who am I? What is my practice? What are my perspectives? What's my worldview? Who do I work with? What do I think about? Where do those thoughts come from? What is it informed by? And really locating yourself to know where you are and why you think the things that you do. And then thinking about, okay, so like, what do I need to flesh this out into a more holistic practice? Who do I need to learn from? What colleagues have experiences that I can learn from? How can I do that in a way that prioritizes like their expertise and makes them feel valued and isn't just like adding on an extra job for them to like tell me about their fucking horrible shit. You know, like I don't want to talk to someone about how trans I am. Like, you know, Google it. Like that sort of thing. Like I think, you know, one of the hard parts is knowing how to put this stuff in action. And like one of the absolute key things is like you need to know who you are and why you feel the way that you do. And you need to see the hard stuff that comes up from that and interrogate it. And it's deeply, deeply uncomfortable. But you cannot skip that step. Especially where you hold power and where you hold privilege. And think about your interactions with your colleagues. Like definitely your colleagues, like you have to think about your colleagues as well as your clients. Like if you are not working well with your colleagues, you are not working well with the people that you're seeing. So like, you know, when you really dig deep, how do you view your power? Do you, like, when you really dig deep, are you working from a place of like seeing your client as the one that is the expert? Are you working from a place of negotiation? Or, you know, and negotiation is such a tricky word because it deeply implies coercion. Like if I'm negotiating with you, I'm trying to draw you to a middle space where we can agree. That is really different from hearing you and working with you where you're at. And like these things that seem like tiny little nuanced pieces, like they all stack up to the bigger picture. And like that is how you get to a place where you actually can say that you are trauma informed or you're working from a decolonized point of view, because those are really nice words, but you have to know what they mean, and you have to be able to say, this is how it applies to me, and I actually have something meaningful to say. That work is never done. It's like never done. We're never gonna be like how, like, it would, we are not speaking from this high horse of being like, yes, we are decolonized and we're going to teach you how to decolonize. Like we are settlers and we are the recipients of unjust privilege and power in this colony. Also, like when you do that work, when you mess it up, it becomes so much easier to deal with it. Because the more you know, the more you know who you are, the more you understand that you're fallible. And when you inevitably make a mistake, which you absolutely will, which we do all the time and we will continue to do forever, it means that you have more of a framework to be like, oh shit, that thing, this part of me overstepped that time. How can I, like, you know, this is a thing to be aware of. How can I work that in and integrate it? Whereas when you're in a space where you are blind to the different parts of you, when you make a mistake on something, it is going to feel absolutely crushing. And it
Yes.
will make you feel like you are the worst practitioner and you should never do anything again.
Yes.
Or it will make you go the other way where you'll be like, well, whatever, my client is XYZ and that's why it's a problem. It's them, it's not me. And like neither of those situations are constructive at all. But if you can really build a picture of who you are, it means that you have both the things that are challenging, but you also have the things that are really, really good. And those things will come together in those moments of conflict and stress to make you be like, okay, I can work through this.
You see why I wanted him to come?
I do. And I see, you know, there's a few of our participants having to jump off, and that's so fine. But I really do feel like that is like the practical, you know, the final thoughts of this whole, you know, on the couch conversation around what it is that we could be doing and how we could be implementing it in our own work, which is so diverse and so broad. But we didn't get to talking around mutual aid and community, but was there any kind of key takeaways around mutual aid and community just with the last 5 minutes to be able to highlight just for our audience, anything that we really need to be saying just to embrace the discussion today and yeah, and start to wrap up?
Well, in my notes, I wrote myself a note referencing Adrienne Maree Brown. I would say go read Adrienne Maree Brown, go read Emergent Strategy, go read Marcus Cyrus Ware wrote an incredible book that's actually directed for young folks called Abolition is Love. Those are really great resources to pull from around this topic. I think something that I would expand on from Adrienne Maree Brown is that it can feel really frightening to go to betray your role in colonial violence, to betray your role as an agent of power and colonial violence, but like being a thorn in the system side and being a gate opener wherever possible. To draw on what she says about biomimicry and how, like, you know, if we look at how ecology or like the natural world adapts and responds and acts of resistance, like being a thorn in the system sides means that we can grow around it in creative and new ways and find each other in creative and new ways. It doesn't mean that, you know, you're just being difficult. It's actually building something around it, the possibility of doing things differently. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would add to that.
Any final thoughts? Yeah, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I guess if you're sending out show notes, we can send some links. I would add, the only thing I would add to that is there is a video that's on YouTube. It would be a few years old now. It was just when Dean Spade's book came out, Dean Spade Mutual Aid.
Yes.
They did, as part of the book launch, there was a conversation between Dean Spade and Mia Mingus. And I think it's like an hour and a half or something. But it is the most beautiful, meandering conversation about mutual aid and abolition and how these things are inherently together. And it's just these two powerful, incredible minds just bouncing off of each other. And I would listen to it every day until I died. So yeah, I'll send you the link to check in the show notes. It's also like deeply accessible for anyone who's not familiar with either of those concepts as well. Yeah, two very friendly people.
Great.
Do we have time for the question? I really liked your last question about like who inspires us and what we're listening and reading to.
Yes, please tell us who it is.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Because I want to say what Egan said before, which is that the people who shoulder me up and inspire me in this work are like my awesome clients and my solidarity team and my community, especially queer and trans people of color and First Nations people who are working in care and community spaces and roles and doing their best to do justice within oppressive institutions while also surviving the colony. Solidarity team people, including Egan, Sekna, my collaborators. I'm reading Tian Zhang, who is one of my collaborators, wrote an incredible piece that I'll share in the resources called A Manifesto for Radical Care, or How to Be a Human in the Arts. To be fair, I am rereading that. It's not new to me, but I just love it. The value of experiential learning and lived experience within OT training, co-authored by one Mr. Egan Magee very recently, baby's first published article. And Sweatshop has a new anthology out now called Povo, and it is incredible. Get it at any cost. Get it from Sweatshop. I think maybe Glee Books also sells it. But the first story is it'll get you and keep you from there. So
there's some really good ones in there that we haven't already got on our What We're Reading library, which is on our website, but we also recently launched a Goodreads account, and so a heap of stuff into our Goodreads. I think we were like the #1 reviewer for the first time because we added like 100 books in there. We reviewed like 100 books at one time, and now we've gone down, but so we can add some of those in there for our audience to keep track of as well.
I'm gonna spam you. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. I love that. Okay, just as we're wrapping up, I'll pop up the QR code for our audience to share their thoughts and provide any comments or feedback on our webinar today. As always, Jen will be sending out the follow-up email with all the links that Dan and Egan have shared with us today. And it's just the next slide, Winnie, would be great with the QR code. Wonderful. Thank you. Sorry. So yeah, it's give us 5 stars unless you thought we were 4 stars, which is fine. We will accept 4 stars. I'll accept nothing less than 3. That's a me problem, I think. I'll work on that. Okay, so yeah, just wrapping up the conversation, really, thank you so much. It's been such an honor and a real privilege to have you both on the couch, and I feel like something that I'm going to listen back to multiple times as we turn this recording into a visual on YouTube, and then also launch it as an audio podcast on Podbean later in the year. And so yeah, really thank you so much for joining us, and it's been really special and lots of takeaways. So thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Maddie.
Thank you so much.